introduce and welcome Tim, who I noticed. Congressman Ryan has two modes of being, and he's a little bit got both going on, but he's generally either without a jacket, and I call him Tim, or either wears a jacket, and I call him Congressman Ryan. But I'm not quite sure, because he got a T-shirt and a jacket, so I'm not quite sure. But Congressman Ryan, who's been with us for many years, and then Leila, who's with us first time, I believe?
Second.
Second time. Second time. Last year you were with us?
I was.
You were with
I wasn't speaking.
You weren't speaking, that's what I meant. First you were speaking. So the title of this session, which I know is our last, is this balance between inner development and mindfulness and wisdom, and developing that in ourselves, and then also right action in the world. And I know one of the issues that comes up for a lot of us is when we think about doing some kind of inner practice like meditation or mindfulness, it's easy to become very insulated, and you look out at the world and there's all this suffering and all these challenges. And how do we work with both our own inner process of emotions and stress and difficulty, but then also see this larger world that needs our attention and needs our compassion, needs our love, and what does it mean to kind of skillfully engage in both of those arenas. So we're here to explore what that is. And I wanted to first start with you, Leila, and I would love for you just to talk about your work and how you see this balance in your own life and your own work.
Sure. Well, I'm hardly the example, but I'm trying. So I run an organization called Sama Group. Sama means equal in Sanskrit. And we use technology to level the playing field. So we started our first enterprise about 6 years ago. And we teach very low-income people in places like slums in Africa and Nairobi, rural parts of Uganda and India, how to do work through the internet. And they do really basic tasks that pay them a living wage locally. And we're a almost self-sustaining social enterprise because we earn revenue through contracts with big tech companies. So we've employed about 6,800 people since we started. And on average, they triple their income after working with Sama.
Wow.
And we have another enterprise called samahope.org, which is a crowdfunding site for medical treatments focused on funding critical care for women and children. And I got started in this work because I randomly went to Africa when I was 17, mainly just to escape Los Angeles and have a good time and have an adventure before college. And I couldn't believe what I saw, which was so many really unbelievably bright people who were incredibly hardworking and just had zero access to opportunity. And I'd grown up thinking that that meritocracy was the global norm. My parents were immigrants, and we managed okay here in the U.S. But I realized then that talent is equally distributed and opportunity is not. So that was my start in all of this. And I have to say that I didn't really believe in mindfulness practices until quite recently. My father's an engineer, and science was prized in my household, and there wasn't a ton of mainstream research in this field until, I would say, fairly recently, at least the kind of research that reaches people who aren't specialists. And so I was really skeptical, and I didn't really understand my motivations for doing this kind of work until I had some personal crises in the last 2 years. And it opened me up in a way that I had never been opened up before to all of these new ways of thinking. And that's kind of what got me into it.
Without giving too many details, when you said it opened you up to ways, in different ways, is there a little more you can say in that? Was it a sense of understanding, wow, I have this mind that creates these experiences for me, or was it feeling like there's this pain or this grief that I haven't taken time to feel? I'm just curious if you're comfortable with it, saying a little bit more about maybe what that entails.
Sure. I went through some stuff in my childhood and didn't fully understand how much that had impacted me. There was abuse in my family. And I had always been the kind of person who I was class president, I ran clubs, I traveled a bunch, I was like, go, 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 go. I reconnected with one of my high school teachers during this period of openness, and he told me that I always seemed like I was running, not towards something so much as from something, even in high school. And then many years later, I went through a really challenging breakup, and probably the only silver lining to a breakup is self-discovery.
Yeah, yeah. I think people can relate in the audience.
I was
Anybody broken up?
I was crying every day. I felt like I've always been inspired by strong women, and I felt like I was kind of disappointing myself and being so weak. And it was only in that moment of incredible weakness that I went out. I actually started meditating, and I started going to therapy for the first time, which I actually think everybody should talk about, because we go to the gym like it's normal every day. So I started doing that, and believe me, I was like the last person who would have ever done yoga or meditation or going to a therapist. I always thought these were really silly things that hippies did.
Particularly with all the suffering going on in the world. Yeah.
Right, and I thought it was self-indulgent and sort of navel-gazing, and I had never stopped to examine, why do I care about these people on the other side of the world, and what's motivating me to do the work I do? And in this period of openness, I started understanding that I think a big part of it was like a subconscious drive to alleviate suffering in others, because I had it deep within and I hadn't dealt with it.
Wow. So. I want to get to Tim, but if you
sure.
Has your relationship with your work changed, or does it feel
completely?
Yeah.
Completely. I think I would often beat myself up for not doing things perfectly, and I come from a sort of a strict immigrant background. My parents are Indian, and I was raised very differently from how a lot of my peers were raised, and I always would be really upset with myself if things weren't going perfectly, and I translated that really often to my work, and I transferred it to my employees. And for the first, I'd say, 5 years of running our organization, we now have 80 staff, I'd say I was a pretty bad manager. I think I've gotten a lot better recently, but I didn't feel the sort of compassion towards my employees and myself that I felt towards the people that we help. And I think the opening up and the mindfulness work has dramatically changed that relationship. Beautiful. But it is a struggle. It's an ongoing struggle.
Congressman, yeah.
My answer is not going to be nearly as interesting, whatever the question is.
The question was to describe how you view your work currently, and how you see this interplay between both external work in the world and the internal work of one's own mind, body, and heart. And I think Leila spoke to it quite well, but I wondered if you had anything from your own experience.
I think the older I get and the more I'm in Congress, the more it's not separate. It's the same work. And you have other members of Congress. Are
they acting out your family in different ways?
Well, they become part of the practice of self-regulation. And it's true. And your kids, your spouses, your day to day, it all becomes spouses, all our spouses, not my spouses. They become part of the practice. And so I think being here, being out in the world, seeing what people are doing with veterans and schools and all the rest, that process is how can you do that and continue, trying to the extent you can, embodying your own self.
So how would you, let's say you're engaged with a Republican member of Congress who disagrees with just about everything you're for. If you see him or her as part of your practice, how do you relate to that person differently?
Well, I try to keep some level of awareness, because it's very easy to get mad.
Yeah.
You're like, I can't believe you said that. Right. How can you do this? I was supposed to be here Friday night, and I'm here, not here till Saturday night. Like, you're ruining my weekend. Right. I mean, it could be anything. But they make an argument, and you get mad. Yeah. And I did. I mean, many of my early years in Congress, I would get mad, and I would hoot and holler and yell and scream, and But now it's like, I'm not going to let you get me mad. I'm going to see myself want to engage in that way, and then, but that's not good, because I want to be paying attention to what you're saying, because 30 or 35 or 40% of the people are going to vote for Democrats, 35 or 40% are going to vote for Republicans. There's 20% of the people that are going to listen and want to be persuaded. And if I'm getting mad, first and foremost, no one wants to follow anyone who's angry, for the most part. And secondly, secondly, I think it's important to see the arguments as they're coming out, so that you can make your point to that independent party who's paying attention. If I'm mad and just thinking about what points I'm going to make, as opposed to, boy, they left a big opening here in their argument, and if I point that out, someone neutral third party is going to say, wow, that guy's making a lot more sense than they are. You can lose that ability if you're not in the moment. You know.
How do you balance that, though, with the passion that you inevitably have, where you see so much resources and money that's being used in the government to go to things that clearly doesn't seem to be helping, and clearly seems to be a total waste? And that must be hugely frustrating. And so, are you less passionate about kind of doing whatever piece you can to change that?
Well, no, I'm more passionate now because I see what's happening in this world that can help change it, you know, help shift it. And
somebody agrees with you, by the way.
Yeah. I think that was Matt. Matt works for me. That was Matt. I said, try to get some applause
always
lines.
Bring somebody to agree with them.
So I feel just as passionate, but it's not necessarily as animated maybe as it always was. But you know, I'm more excited today than I've ever been about what the possibilities are. But there is this huge block in Congress that's hurting progress, I think, in a lot of different ways. But my focus is, okay, at some point, we're going to look for an alternative approach to how we do things. And I think my job is
whether
to
it's
help.
Education or prisons or whatever.
I mean, innovation, what the social emotional learning and some of these attention practices and mindful practices in schools are able to do for kids. What they're doing for veterans. We lose 22 vets a day take their own life because of post-traumatic stress. And I'm seeing all kinds of programs that are healing vets, getting them off 12 or 15 prescription drugs a day, haven't slept through the night for years, sometimes decades, and go through a mindfulness-based stress reduction program or Project Welcome Home Troops or some of these other approaches, and they're down to 1 or 2 meds a day and sleeping through the night. I see that happening. So I'm passionate about building out this other system, so when the people start saying, well, who's doing something that's working as opposed to all this nonsense that's happening over here, we're all positioned to say, you know, here's the science, don't talk to me, talk to the scientists. Here are the vets, don't talk to me, talk to the vets. Here's the school programs, don't talk to me, talk to the teachers and the parents. That system's already being built out. So I'm passionate about that, and boy, this I guess is somewhat a mindful approach too. You can continue to bang your head against the wall over here, or you can build the alternative system over here and then try to persuade people to see that.
Great. Thank you. And because we're in San Francisco in the Bay Area, I mean, there's been a lot of issues that come up, whether it's income disparity or kind of the responsibility of the tech industry to the larger issues of the world. And I think in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley in particular, it can get very insulated, and there's this competitiveness to who can make the most money and who can kind of get the biggest whatever. I'm curious, what do you see the role that the tech community can play in terms of fostering kind of a greater social change and social movement? It feels like there's a lot of power and influence and resources that are kind of held here. And I'm curious what you see the opportunity is and how you think we can maybe more fully utilize that opportunity to kind of expand the impact to people who otherwise aren't seen or aren't noticed or kind of do not get to participate in the digital revolution that is a certain percentage gets to participate in. But like anything, there's a lot of people for whom that's not a part of their world, and they're easily forgotten, and they're not necessarily have lobbying groups to talk to you. And I'm curious what you see could be a potential movement of sorts that could incorporate them and also incorporate the sense that we're all one and we all have our own unique offerings. So wherever you want to grab a hold of that.
Well, I think of one area that we're working on in Youngstown. My district is in Northeast Ohio. It's halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Is there a Buckeye over here?
That's your chief of staff again.
There you go. We're an obnoxious bunch. Don't worry about it. So we're in Northeast Ohio, and one of the issues that we're taking up is the issue of coding, computer coding, and there are all kinds of clubs. Girls Who Code, Yes We Code, spun out of the Obama administration with Van Jones. And there are 3 coding jobs for every 1 person that's qualified to get the job. It's the complete opposite of the national trends in the labor force, where there's 3 people looking for every 1 job. So we're putting a package together in my congressional district to train coders, and this is kind of what we're doing, having foundations sponsor men and women to go get trained in coding. In 12 weeks, in a 12-week program, it's a private program, you can become qualified for a job that pays $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. And in Northeast Ohio, that's a good living. So
in San Francisco, we call that rent.
Yes, that's it. Exactly. Which is why I would like to invite all the San Francisco companies to come to Ohio, and we will put a nice package together for you. And that part of it is the cost, to try to attract businesses. But this person, so we want to get foundations to pay $10,000 for this person to go get trained. But that person will then be obligated to 2 years of going into schools and training and starting coding clubs in the schools. So you get the person the job, but then you grow out the broader coding workforce. Okay. And I think companies in Silicon Valley and on the coasts, through foundations, can really help ramp up and shrink the level of inequality that's happening, because you can do the coding anywhere. Right. And it's needed in all kinds of different businesses now.
Leila?
I think Congressman Ryan makes a really good point, which is that it's not just enough to build these tools, but you also need to take it out into the communities that don't have access. And what we've seen, so we have a US program called Sama USA that's sort of an adaptation of our work with SamaSource. We've trained about 350 people now in rural Arkansas, several parts of California, including Merced, which is in Central Valley and is extremely poor. It was rated the most miserable city in America by Forbes a couple of years ago, and mainly due to unemployment. And we've tested it out in New York City as well, and it's like an 8-week boot camp. It's similar to the coding program you mentioned, and we teach people all of the digital skills they need to be freelancers in the new economy, whether that's making stuff and selling it on Etsy or eBay, or actually using the internet to perform services, so doing data entry or even being a virtual assistant for someone. And we've had a lot of success with the program. About 200 or so of the graduates have found ongoing paying work, and on average they supplement their income by about $1,200, and it's really cheap to train them. It's less than $3,000 per person. So to a lot of government officials, this is a really attractive program. The challenge is that in the tech community, we often think that if we just put this curriculum online, then low-income people will find it, and we'll see a reduction in poverty. And I think we have to retrain ourselves, especially in Silicon Valley, around what it actually takes to extend some of these social programs. It's a lot of boots on the ground. That said, I'm really hopeful. There have been a lot of scathing critiques of Silicon Valley. There's one in the New Yorker a couple years back. And I actually look at my peer group, so people in their early 30s, in some cases late 20s, who've made a lot of money in tech, and I am astounded by how charitable this generation is. I would say that in this group of people in the Bay Area, if you don't give, people are surprised. We have a number of really amazing charities like Tipping Point, which aggregate all of this wealth and direct it to great nonprofits. So I think we're making headway.
If you look at though the trend though is that more and more is getting held by smaller and smaller numbers. So it feels like there is this beautiful charity that's happening, but over the spectrum, there's a lot of people who feel like this divide is not getting any better.
And I would say that that's a consequence of an increasingly technological economy. There's some researchers who study this and who have found that aggregation is sort of inherent in some of the systems that we're building. And so I kind of think we're going to have to own up to the fact that if that's the case, then we have to provide like a universal basic income to ensure that nobody falls below a certain floor.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Can you get that bill passed, Tim?
Yeah.
What's that?
A universal basic income. Can you think you can move that through?
Not controversial at all.
We're trying to keep the lights on in the Department of Homeland Security right now. That's like, yeah. The other piece too, and we were talking. I was talking to Kelly Boys earlier from Ming's Search Inside Yourself. We have a lot in Ohio and a lot of other places, tech incubators. In Youngstown, we have a business software incubator that's one of the best in the world. It was just ranked. And so we want to bring Search Inside Yourself to the Youngstown Business Incubator and allow the hundreds of people that are there within our technology belt from Cleveland, Akron, Youngstown, and Pittsburgh to get trained in Search Inside Yourself. I mean, those are the kind of things that, is there a direct kind of connect like the coding piece? No. But to have tech workers in Youngstown, Akron, Cleveland, Pittsburgh getting trained in Search Inside Yourself, connecting in some way to Google and their programming, I think helps people in our community feel like, wow, we're really moving in the right direction. Maybe tech's the way to go. Maybe there is hope for my future, and that those things are intangible. Yeah. And I think it's important for the tech communities in different areas of the country to recognize that, yeah, it's money, it's starting a foundation and getting people connected into coding, but it's also their brand. Google's got a great brand. These other companies here got a great brand. And so to have that brand in places in the Midwest brings a lot of cachet and a lot of hopefulness that is the juice that makes things go.
Yeah, great. Follow up, it feels like there's well, this is my language and you may disagree or not disagree, but often that when there's a movement, the movement is opposing something. So in the 60s it was kind of let's all not do business and let's drop out and smoke whatever they want to smoke and kind of free love and things. And there's often a movement that's in opposition to something else. And I think what really excites and interests me is an inner revolution, which I think you called, or the quiet revolution. Which might be noisy at times. But how do we foster a revolution and a movement that's not so much in opposition, but that's in participation, but at the same time is speaking loudly for the things that it wants to speak for, but that brings the people in to that process so that it's not against somebody. And from what I know about both of you, you have this charge to be a part of a movement. Or you feel yourself wanting to kind of have that energy about you. And I'm curious how you see yourself in that mix and what you see, if there is a movement afloat, how would you best describe it? And what do you feel like are some of the kind of key inquiries or questions that you feel important to ask?
I really feel like, and this is somewhat self-serving given that I run one, but I feel like social enterprise is that movement. And for us at Sama Group, we follow this definition that Muhammad Yunus put together. He's the 2006 Nobel laureate for his work with microfinance and social business. And he came up with this really interesting concept, which is a business that aims to solve a social or environmental problem, but to do so in a sustainable way. So a business that ideally breaks even, or maybe even does better than break even every year. But the goal isn't to maximize profit, it's to maximize social or environmental benefit. And some of the people that I've told this to here in the States think that this is communism, but it's actually not. It's using the mechanism of the market to solve real problems. And the opportunities in this space are enormous. We've already seen a huge interest in a new classification of business called B Corporation, and you guys all probably know about B Corporation. I think that's really the revolution within. Because it's not saying that business is bad and that free markets are terrible and we need to all give away all of our money and run everything through philanthropy. It's saying that business is actually the vehicle that we can use to change so many of these outcomes. And if we apply the same principles that have resulted in Google and Apple getting tremendous scale around the world to some of these social and environmental problems, we'll see real traction. Okay. So we were chatting earlier about the prison system. And if you think about how messed up prisons and schools are in our state in California, you could think about how this model might apply really beautifully to some of these systems. So there's an organization that we've partnered with Sama USA called the Reset Foundation, and they're looking at building essentially a charter prison. And that could even be revenue generating. You could have a prison where you're doing job training and where inmates are actually producing something that's sold, and that offsets the cost of running the prison. And if you think that way, the world just really opens up.
Right. And that there's a humane way of engaging versus being on the outside.
Absolutely, and you can use these principles of the free market to really drive social change. And the nonprofit world is, I'd say, sometimes equally skeptical. I've had a really tough time running these ideas by heads of foundations in the past who see the revenue line on our budget from big contracts with big tech companies as scary. And I think we sort of have to embrace both if we're going to change some of these big problems.
Great.
Yeah, that's great. So social entrepreneurship is phenomenal. I think there's an excitement that happens when you do talk about these new ideas. I think there's an openness to that and this today that there wasn't 5 or 10 years ago. And I think today, I think it's imperative for us to go out and talk about it as political leaders, especially because we're in a political system now, obviously, that's stuck. And everybody, is afraid to say some new idea because someone's going to criticize it. But the reality is, let's have a discussion. Do we want to go down this road? Do you want to continue the status quo? Or do you want to talk about the kind of things we're talking about up here and defend it and say, no, this is the direction. Here's why. Here's the vets. Talk to them. Here's the science. Let's go. I mean, what are we waiting for? How many more vets do you want to take their own lives? How many more kids do you want trapped in poverty? How many more kids do you want that are incapable of getting up the socioeconomic ladder because you haven't taught them things that can help tune their brain up to get them in line to do that? When we know there are things out there. So go out and defend it. I mean, and I think people are dying for that kind of leadership, and take the hits.
Yeah.
I think you take the hits and you make the argument, and if the people aren't ready for it, they're not ready for it. But I think it's.
But don't stand down.
I mean, I just think everyone, and that's why people don't like politicians, because it's like, well, you're not solving any of our problems. I don't know if anyone's watched the Roosevelt documentary on PBS, and you can stream it on Amazon, I think. I mean, it's phenomenal to see both Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt's leadership of just like, I got to be calculating, I can't be crazy, I can't get way out ahead, but this is the direction we're going in, and I will have an argument and a discussion with anybody who wants to have it to defend the direction that I think we need to go
I think
in.
the challenge that I have a little bit with either that and also social entrepreneurship, which on one level I love, but someone who is very involved in different movements and activities at times, I see that the same thing that gets played out in for-profit can easily get played out in non-profit. Like, I'm doing so much better, I've raised more money, and I'm doing more social good than you're doing. Well, we've reached 10,000 people, and it becomes this ego thing, which we've all experienced, we've all been a part of. And so the same mechanism gets caught even in a for good dynamic than it does in a for-profit dynamic. It's still this kind of ego-oriented, anxious, I've got to save the world approach.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we can work together on a way to both honor that side, but then also the self-awareness side that says, listen, we're bringing a lot to this, and the more that we develop in ourselves, the more we can actually see clearly and partner in a different way than playing out those old kind of patterns. And I guess that's my concern with the social entrepreneurship is, can we kind of harness that power, but then also have some support around the self-awareness piece that that there's pieces that we're probably bringing in from our past that probably aren't so useful. And if we're open to that, we can be much more effective, engaged activists.
That said, how awesome would it be if people competed on the basis of lives saved in the corporate world?
Or just not competed at all. Yeah. Like, have a different orientation. Yeah, I've got to save more lives this quarter because we have to approach.
We'd be in a much better place if that's what people were competing about. But I think the way that I share it with friends of mine who I would say are as skeptical as I was before I started meditating and reading Jack Kornfield's books and being open to things like therapy. The way that I sort of get them to get excited about it is as I talk about how it's influenced my functioning. And I think similarly to what you said, Congressman Ryan, about making better arguments if you're not angry, I think that being mindful just makes you a better leader. It makes people, certainly I'm much better with my employees. I'm much more compassionate with the people around me, and I think that drives good business. And so I know that that's using mindfulness as a means to an end, and we should just embrace it for itself. But I think in terms of selling it in an environment like Silicon Valley or like Congress, just using the argument that it's really beneficial for just making better arguments and being a better leader.
And if you live that through your experience, then it's not preaching, it's just your experience.
I think there's an argument to be made too for having leaders who have a strong sense of self too. I mean, if the community is anxious and there's the kind of dysfunction that we have now in our country, I think it's important to have somebody that's at least 1 foot outside of that system that's dysfunctioning to say, well, I can see that system and I'm in it, but I can also see the dysfunction, and these are all mindful practices. I mean, because if you stay in that system totally, then you're part of the dysfunction. And what's happening now is you can have in an organization, in a church, in a synagogue, in a government, you can have a very small group running the whole shop, and the tail's wagging the dog. And I think that's what we're having now. So when I say that I think it's important for us to portray this other vision, it's because the current system is broken, and we need to have people outside of it that are aware of both things, but are able to create this new dynamic. And is it a competition, or is it we're going to build this new thing out?
I guess my piece is I remember Tony Hsieh, who's the CEO of Zappos, has been here and spoken a couple times. He said once, he said, the greatest and hardest lesson I've learned from my life is that the external world is just a reflection of my internal world within. And I've always felt that that has a core of truth to that, and that there's a way in which we can try to change things in the external world, but the reflection of an internal world that's also present. And it's somehow honoring both of those. And I feel like that's the inquiry list that I'm in, which is what does it mean to be able to honor both the need for the external change, but then also realizing that if the consciousness isn't there, if there's not love, if there's not compassion, you can build all the schools you want in any place you want, and eventually they're probably going to get all knocked down if the people's hearts and minds are not in a certain place.
Yeah. One of the first nuggets that really influenced me was John's book, Coming to Our Senses, the however many pages of him talking about the body politic. He talked about the body and the mind-body experience and all the rest, and then how that is then later reflected into the body politic. Right. And so it is all of our collective internal turmoil that is now spilling out into the world, and that gets back to income inequality and unhealthiness and all these bad habits. Our food system, to me, is a huge issue too as well. And so that's all being reflected. So our internal sickness, we look and now say, well, this is the first generation of Americans that won't live as long as their parents. That's where we are. So our individual sickness, that's what it looks like. A whole generation of people that won't live as long, or half the country will have diabetes and pre-diabetes in the next 5 years. Unsustainable, but that's just a collection of all of us being sick.
I'm realizing we're out of time, and I'm realizing I don't want to end on that. So I'm in a middle of a dilemma here. I'm just sharing it out loud.
Well,
but it's true, right? Yeah. Do you want to end us?
Well, I hope I don't have to end us, but you know, one of the challenges I was thinking about as I arrived here was that we're talking about this sort of dichotomy between the internal and the external, but really that's a little false, because that assumes that we're sort of individual beings and that we're not connected to everything around us, right? And one of the things that I think is so liberating about modern science is that physics has essentially shown us that that's completely false, that everything in our bodies comes from stardust, and everything in our bodies will return to stardust. And so in a sense, we're all so profoundly connected. And the idea that you're sitting over there and you're a separate being entirely from me is just sort of a human construct. Yeah. And so on my worst days, when I'm just really struggling and I'm really angry at someone, I try to remember that, like, she's just a collection of atoms over there, and so am I. And so, like, you know, she has her own thoughts and ideas and stuff, but really, if I zoom out enough, like in the cosmic sense, it really doesn't matter. And I think that's just thinking that way is really helpful.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. So I want to thank Congressman Ryan and Leila for joining us, and really appreciate both the work that you do. Samasource, Tim just came out with the new book,
Real Food Revolution.
Real Food Revolution. So check out
Amazon.com.
work. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Soren.